Opening prayers, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Right. So we have 4 sessions on mind training, and we've chosen the text, Geshe Chekawa's commentary on Geshe Langri Tampa's 8 verses of mind training. So this is a very popular text because it's very succinct and it embodies the main elements of mind training. So many people memorize it. If we can, it's very useful to do that so that we can always run through the verses no matter where we are. Because, of course, mind training is a continuous activity. And in a way, we need to have the elements of mind training in our mind all the time for it to be effective. So mind training itself is a term that was coined probably with Langri Tampa's text, the 8 verses of mind training. The tradition itself comes from Atisha Daipankara Sri Jnana, who is a great master within the Indian tradition, who trained with various masters. So the mind training tradition is really sourced in Atisha. Atisha himself gained the instructions on mind training from 3 of his teachers, which included Dhammarakshita, who was a teacher at Dantapuri Mahavira in northern India at that time. Also, Maitri Yogi, who was a yogic practitioner of Maitreya, and thus the name. And also Sera Lingpa. And Sera Lingpa was a resident in Sumatra, Suvarnadvipa. And it was to visit him that Atisha set out on a sea voyage after he attained ordination and he'd studied at various centers in India, in order to gain experience of training the mind itself, to gain a deep understanding of the practice. He sought to visit Sera Lingpa or Dhammakirti, who lived at a center there where he was training this large body of ordained beings. I think there were 500. And there he stayed for 12 years. And during that period, he gained the essential practice of mind training, or Lojong. So Lojong is a combination of 2 terms, Lo, like in the word Lo Sang, pure mind. Lojong is training the mind or training awareness. Lo itself is probably a primary consciousness, but it's used as a basic term representing the full range of mental activity. And Zhongwa means to purify or to train that. So this term Lo Zhong actually refers to the whole entire practice of Buddha Dhamma, which is basically to purify the mind. But in order to be able to purify the mind, you really need to have contact with someone who's gained experience of the practice, has advanced in the practice, is able to share their experience with you. So for that reason, Atisha visited Serlingpa. Serlingpa is the Tibetan term for a person from the Golden Island or Suvarnadvipa or Sumatra. And there, when he met Serlingpa, he realized that he did have a connection, that there was this opportunity for him to train. And in staying there in 12 years, he gained an adequate experience of what his teacher had to give to him. And then he returned to India. Of the three teachers, a teacher is said to have held Serlingpa or Dhammakirti as the kindest, as the one from whom he really gained an essential understanding of this process of training the mind. His other teachers were also important, that is Dhammakirti, Dhammarakshita. Dhammarakshita was a monk at Odantapuri. He was also said to have been a Vaibhashika, or someone who held one of the lower tenet systems as his preferred system. So the Vaibhashikas themselves refers to up to 18 or more different philosophical systems. But in that system, things are regarded as being truly existent, and it's far removed from the Prasangika or the Madhyamika interpretation of reality. I've heard it said that he preferred that system because it helped him train in compassion, because if you think beings are truly existent, it potentially gives you a stronger motivation to generate compassion. However, whatever the case, Atisha did study with him for some years and gained insight into his technique. And then also Maitri Yogi was a practitioner of yoga that focused on Maitreya, gaining a vision of Maitreya himself. And he was also a practitioner of Mahamudra, that he passed on to Atisha, and Atisha passed on to Drom Turnpa and so forth. So we have these three sources of mind training that Atisha brought with him to Tibet. And when he found the opportunity, he would teach them. And in Tibet, he had various students whom he met over the period of 15 years or so in Tibet. And when he met different students, he would give them different forms of mind training practice, or he would teach even more preliminary practices to them. But in this way, until he passed away, he taught in Tibet this system of mind training. So the later followers of his tradition were called Kadampas, which means those who train in the instruction on the holy speech of the Buddha. In other words, that they are those that focus on the core practices of what the Buddha taught, try to condense it down into a simple practice so that it may be effective. So what we have here is this tradition of mind training being introduced to Tibet And through the various events that occurred in the life of Atisha while in Tibet, he set forth or turned the wheel, in a sense, of the mind training teachings. And we have, therefore, this heritage of mind training teachings that are included in various works, such as the text on the 100 types of mind training and so forth. Fortunately, we still have a great deal of material, and Atisha himself, being the one who initiated these teachings, also gave specific teachings on mind training that were later assimilated by practitioners and then taught again, from their own experience in a slightly different format, which is extremely helpful for practitioners, because if we can get the basic teachings from Shakyamuni Buddha presented in a local language with experience of the meaning, then it's accessible to us. It's hard for us actually to go back to the early teachings as they're recorded. For instance, the Kangyur, and the Kangyur does contain a vast number of texts, but we notice that the Kangyur often, is just wrapped in brocade and just kept in the cabinet on the altar. And practitioners don't go there and pull out a text and just start reading it because it's the speech of the Buddha. In fact, later students would rely on commentaries that were able to condense this very extensive and profound body of work into something palatable, something that we can actually relate to. And this was the same for the Tibetans. It was the same for the Chinese. It was the same for every region where Buddhism spread. And it's also the same for the initial spread of the Dharma in India itself, where India itself is like Europe. It has 17 major language groups with different traditions, different food, different influences playing on them. And so when the Buddha first taught in Magadh, in the northern regions of India, what he taught was taken back to the various communities, and it had to be translated into the local language. It had to be assimilated. And so there was this period of like assimilation, even within India, in order to gain access to the meaning of the teachings, to the actual word itself, in a form that ordinary beings can understand. For instance, if we go into the Kangyur and we take, say, the Prajnaparamita Sutras, really these days, probably all we hear is the Heart Sutra in 35 verses. The 8,000 verse, there's a Diamond Sutra, which maybe has 350 verses, I think. Then the 8,000 verse, the 18,000 verse, the 20,000, the 25,000, the 100,000 verse. These larger ones are virtually not examined, which is an interesting thought. But it just shows the need to have a simple teaching that is taken to be authentic, that represents the breadth and depth of the original teaching, that we can have access to. So this was really a function of Atisha in Tibet. It came after the disruption of Langdama, King Langdama, who had secularized many of the ordained. He'd eliminated monasteries and so forth. And so there's a dark period in Tibet where the teachings had declined, almost to the point of being non-existent. And in fact, when Atisha came, Tibet was still struggling to recover the Dharma. And so he came at a very important point where he was able to embody the actual teachings of the Buddha, show the local Tibetans how to reestablish it, how to practice Dharma. In fact, he was often regarded as the Karma teaching Lama. I remember one reference, because when he taught in Tibet, he would often teach on a very basic level of karma, and the importance of understanding karma, the importance of understanding virtue and non-virtue and how to distinguish that, in order to provide a basis for the ongoing preservation and development of Buddha Dharma in Tibet. And of course, when we look at other countries like China, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so forth, countries to where Buddha Dharma previously has spread, that there were always difficulties, there were always challenges, and in a way, the Dharma had to be represented, made fresh, made new, in order to appeal to new generations, and in order to counter the influence of politics, disasters, just floods and earthquakes and so forth that could impede the survival of the Buddha Dharma. So in the West at present, we are taking an interest in Buddhism, and we're facing various conditions in the West, and we can therefore relate to the Tibet situation with the persecution of Dharma there. We can relate to the trials of the Chinese from an early period, when they assimilated these teachings from India, which was quite remarkable because India and Chinese cultures are so different. However, China was able to welcome and integrate Buddhism into its own culture, its own intellectual culture, and find benefit from that integration, assimilation. And it was preserved. It's still, today, it still exists in China, of course, but under the difficulties that are presented by communism. In the West, it's more that we are dealing with the issues of materialism and ethics and seeking to understand whether the nature of enlightenment exists, and if it does exist, what is it? How does one approach it? What are all the issues that one needs to overcome in order to assimilate these basic teachings that point towards the possibility of enlightenment? So in a way, we are, we in the West, we face the same types of issues that were faced in Tibet, that are faced in Tibet today, faced in China, Sri Lanka, other countries around the world. And in fact, any ethical tradition on the planet, there are dangers, there are difficulties that need to be addressed. So, of course, Atisha went to Tibet on the advice of one of his deities, Tara, who advised him it would be beneficial to go to Tibet in that period of challenge that existed in Tibet. And he decided to go, although he wasn't young when he left. And the journey to Tibet was not easy. India is hot, and it's low. It's in a plain. For instance, we mainly spent his time in the North Indian Gangetic Plain. If you travel to Tibet, there are various difficulties that one confronts. So he took on that burden, even though it would shorten his life, because there was value to what he could give to the Tibetans. They would understand the value of it. They would sustain it. They would nurture it. and benefit from it. So because of that benefit, he went. So I was thinking just in the beginning that we could just read a short verse presentation of Atisha himself, which speaks of the just meaning of mind training, the tradition that he introduced to Tibet. So this is before we get to show Geshe Chekawa's text. And anyway, it's a bit like an introduction to it. So I'll just read it out slowly. So this is actually, it's the first text in the 100, or the great collection of mind training by Atisha, and it's called the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland. So as he starts out in this text, so here what we need to keep our mind on is what the mind training is. To really, this, of course, he composed this work, and he's there to introduce mind training to Tibet. So how is he introducing it? So we can see something of this in, I think, in this text. And first he says, homage to great compassion, homage to the teachers, homage to the faith divinities. So it keeps it very simple. Compassion, yes. Compassion really is an essential element of mind training. Homage to teachers, they're again an essential element to mind training. For if we don't have teachers, someone to embody the teachings for us, it becomes just academic. And we, naturally being full of doubt, tend to be more consumed by doubt than really practicing the elements of mind training. So homage to the teachers, incredibly important. Again, our relationship to our teachers is very important. And the need, as it comes up in Lam Rim is really sourced in mind training. In Lam Rim, the importance of one's teachers is spoken of again and again. And we need to remind ourselves of this because we have various faults. For instance, we have a certain level of arrogance, and arrogance is one of the main obstacles to generating a positive connection with our teachers, because arrogance is just looking at our own positive qualities, not judging. It's not like pride. It's not comparing ourselves. It's just looking at our own good qualities, and sort of through that mindset that comes through just dwelling on what we think are our good qualities, we may become arrogant. And that means that we may look down on our teachers even. And we may raise ourselves up. Then that could lead into pride for ourselves. We compare ourselves with others then and think we're better than others. So that process we have to be aware of, and we have to counter it all the time, because our imprints are broad and rich for this type of arrogance and so on. We need to counter them all the time. And homage to the faith divinities, again, what he mentions there, the faith divinities, the word faith comes up. So the importance of faith comes up there, not only to have divinities who represent or are objects of faith, but to remember the benefit of faith itself. And faith itself is the first of the 11 positive mental factors or virtuous mental factors. So it's listed first because, in a way, we must have faith in the beginning in order to facilitate our practice. It sort of lays down a path for our practice. So in the beginning here, Atisha is paying homage to compassion, to our teachers, and to the faith divinities. And then he goes on to say in verse 1, discard all lingering doubts and strive with dedication in your practice. Thoroughly relinquish sloth, mental dullness, and laziness, and strive always with joyful perseverance. So even though that's self-evident, we have to keep reminding ourselves of this. And the second verse, with mindfulness, vigilance, and conscientiousness, constantly guard the gateways of your senses. Again and again, 3 times, both day and night, examine the flow of your thoughts. So in those 2 verses, firstly, getting us to put aside our doubts about the practice and exert ourselves with dedication and overcome laziness, basically, and strive in perseverance. So perseverance is a type of what? A type of something that withstands adverse conditions. Persevere. We persevere when the conditions are not ideal. But we persevere because perseverance for a positive goal amongst difficult circumstances is extremely positive. And on that basis, we are mindful, we're vigilant, we're conscientious, and we guard the mind, we guard the senses, the sense consciousnesses. And again, we check 3 times in the day and 3 times in the night, we check on the flow of our thoughts. And number 3, verse 3, can reveal your own shortcomings, but do not seek others' errors. So again, a core element of mind training. We should always speak about our faults to others, reveal them to others, and do not seek out others' errors, and stop this thought or these thoughts about the faults of others that continuously arise. Do not seek out others' errors. Conceal your own good qualities. So we do the opposite with our good qualities. Instead of advertising them, we conceal what we think are our good qualities. So that really helps to harm arrogance. Because in a sense, arrogance is reveling, rejoicing in our good qualities, but not in a positive way. So we conceal that so that arrogance doesn't arise. But we proclaim the good qualities of others. Then verse 4, forsake wealth and ministrations. So give up wealth. Here, because we can't living, as we do, in communities here and there, we need a certain amount of money to survive and the rest. Forsake wealth, really here talking about the attachment to wealth, an attachment to teaching or being a mentor, ministrations and so forth. At all times relinquish gain and fame. So gain and fame are one of the main banes that we have. Doing things for, gain, for money, and to become well known or get a name. Doing things for money and a name, those things we have to relinquish. Having modest desires and be easily satisfied and reciprocate kindness. So again, we have these lots of individual instructions that make up mind training. And then cultivate love and compassion and stabilize your awakening mind. So that's straightforward. Stabilize our awakening mind. So what is our awakening mind? Our awakening mind is the mind of great compassion, or it's the mental factor of great compassion that will be in the retinue of bodhicitta when we establish it. But currently, we don't have the awakening mind. We have the preliminary stages but they're quite weak at present. That we stabilize the causes for the awakening mind, relinquish the 10 negative actions, so the 3 of body, the 4 of speech, the 3 of mind, and we should recite them to ourselves, relinquish those, and always reinforce our faith. So again, coming back to faith, which is the first of the 11 virtuous mental factors, that faith we need. Whether one's a practitioner of faith or a practitioner of reality, these two types of practitioners both need faith, especially convictional faith, that is faith based on logic or reasoning. And then the 6th verse says, destroy anger and conceit. So we have to get rid of anger, especially the deep-seated, subtle anger, the resentment that exists in the retinue of that anger, the annoyance on the subtle level, and the conceit that we also generate. We've got to eliminate those and be endowed with humility. So endowed with humility means mortifying the ego. And that's difficult. It's extremely difficult to mortify one's own ego, to kill it, mortify it, be endowed with humility. But there is no other path, because in the end, the self doesn't exist. So all these thoughts about I, the self, and are based on that thought of the self, then to arrogance, pride, jealousy, anger, and so forth. All of the other negative mental factors arise in dependence on the view of the self. These have to be destroyed. Be endowed with humility, meaning one puts oneself lowest. Relinquish wrong livelihood. So if one is engaging in some form of action that is that harms beings, in other words, then we should try, we need to give up that type of activity and take up something that is not wrong livelihood, and be sustained by ethical livelihood. So these are general elements of advice. Forsake material possessions, embellish yourself with the wealth of the noble ones. So we embellish ourselves with the wealth of the noble ones, meaning the wealth of sutra and tantra, the wealth of learning, the wealth of the texts, which is the wealth of the noble ones. Avoid all trifling distractions and reside in the solitude of wilderness. Avoid all trifling distractions. So again, we're looking here at training the mind in calm abiding. And reside in the solitude of wilderness, because there we have less distractions. So initially we need to generate calm abiding. Abandon frivolous words, so idle speech, gossip, and so on. Constantly guard your speech. When you see your teachers and preceptors, reverently generate the wish to serve. That is incredibly important as well, because serving our teachers is hard for us. And preceptors, serving our preceptors is hard for us. But we need to generate the wish to serve, because that helps us to understand all the mistakes that we've already made and to start to avoid them in future. Currently, we probably have lots of transgressions in that area with our own teachers. So we need to purify those things so that we don't maintain that habit. Towards wise beings with Dharma eyes, and towards beginners on the path as well, recognize them as your spiritual teachers. So we need to see everyone as a spiritual teacher, even though they may not be on the path and so forth. We need to see them as our spiritual teachers. In fact, it's said that it's not until the third bodhisattva level that one can take all beings as their spiritual teachers. So until then, one is really practicing to do it. In fact, when you see any sentient being, view them as your parent, your child, or your grandchild. So we should see other beings from that point of view, our parent, our child, or our grandchild. Renounce negative friendships and rely on a spiritual friend, dispel hostility and unpleasantness, and venture forth to where happiness lies. So again, this is like a pep talk from Atisha, giving a succinct list of many different things that we need to do. So it's almost as if, he's just rattling them off from his own deep experience of them, leaving nothing out. Then in the 11th verse, he says, abandon attachment to all things and abide free of desire. So yes, that is our goal. In summary, that's our goal. We should be residing in that way all the time. Attachment fails to bring even the higher realms. So if attachment worked, we would be in heaven already, because our attachment is so deep, pervasive, and strong. But attachment doesn't even bring the higher realms. It doesn't cause us to be reborn in higher realms, even though we're attached to being born in heaven, for instance. In fact, it kills the life of true liberation. So here, Tisha is just earmarking some of the core faults of attachment. It kills the life of true liberation. Because what we want is true liberation, yet we're full of desires for various things. It's like we're living this contradiction. And often we can see this fault in others, but it's hard for us to see it in ourselves. Because of that, it makes us somewhat hypocritical. So our attachment is not benefiting us at all. Why? Because it kills liberation. It murders liberation, the hope of it, the chance of it. So verse 12, when you encounter the causes of happiness, in these always persevere. So when we realize that we're practicing the cause of happiness, we should always persevere in that cause, having recognized it. Whichever task we take up first, address this task primarily. So if we have a number of things that we need to get done, we take up the first positive cause of happiness first. In this way, you ensure the success of both tasks. So we do the first things first, the first cause of happiness, we practice that, then we find another one, okay, then we practice that with the first one as well. The first one's acting as a basis for the second, and so on. If we give up the first cause of happiness, and we start with another cause of happiness, and the cause of happiness is really ethics, then we may not achieve any of the causes. Then verse 13, since you take no pleasure in negative deeds, when a thought of self-importance arises, at that instant deflate your pride and recall your teacher's instructions. So since we take no pleasure in negative deeds, of deeds of body and speech, getting to the level of mind is still very difficult. Even getting to the level of body and speech is difficult. We still haven't reached that point of taking no pleasure in negative deeds because we still engage in them, especially on a mental level. But because we're in danger, because we have negative deeds still arise on a physical, verbal, and mental level. When a thought of self-importance arises, at that instant, deflate your pride. Self-importance here is really like self-cherishing, seeing myself as more important than others, and so on. Instantly, at that point, we should deflate the pride, because pride can act as a basis for that self-importance, can encourage it, be a condition for it. And we should recall our teacher's instruction. So here again, pride is one of the 6 root afflictions. And self-importance there is really speaking of self-cherishing or self-rangchenzin in Tibetan. We recall our teacher's instruction and put them both down because we don't want to add to our store of negative black karmic seeds through engaging in negative deeds. Already our heart or mental consciousness or alaya vijnana, our foundation consciousness, is just full of black seeds. We don't want to increase the number of black seeds in our mind stream. Because of these we don't see at all, because they're subtle and obscure. They are hidden from us. If we could see the amount of black karmic seeds that existed in our mind stream, we would probably be extremely shocked. But it's as if we're completely ignorant of this, and we ignore it. And then when things happen to us, we sort of don't recall, oh, wait a minute, I have all these black karmic seeds that make me a potential field for negative minds arising, negative situations arising. When they arise, I'm shocked by it. But the root cause is like in the center of my own heart, which is this store of black karmic seeds. So we should follow and recall our teacher's instructions. Then the next verse, when discouraged thoughts arise, uplift your mind and meditate on the emptiness of both. So actually, up to this point, we're talking really about compassion, generating compassion. Now with verse 14, a teacher's coming to the other element of mind training, which is emptiness. So when thoughts of discouragement, sem shumpa in Tibetan, it's this being a bit downcast, thinking that, oh, it's hard, can I do it? And can I really train the mind? Can I overcome all of the negative conditions that I must overcome to attain enlightenment? When thoughts of discouragement arise, then we should uplift our mind by meditating on the emptiness of things. So the emptiness here means that we have an idea of what emptiness is. So emptiness itself, like we find in the Sera debate manuals, for instance, the emptiness is defined as dendrukatsangi megak, the non-affirming negation that is the mere absence of true existence. So if that definition works, then good, we can contemplate that. So emptiness, empty of true existence. The empty state empty of true existence is basically what emptiness is. So we just think, contemplate the meaning of emptiness at that point. When objects of distraction or aversion appear, view them as you would illusions and apparitions. So attraction and aversion appear, view them as you would illusions and apparitions. So this is mental attraction and mental repulsion. So our mind is continuously being buffeted one way or the other by mental attraction to objects, or afflictive attraction, or emotional attraction to objects, or emotional repulsion to objects. So therefore, attachment aversion. The mind is being pushed one way and the other. We're attracted to this and then we have aversion for that. So when they appear, we should, extremely difficult, but what we should do is see these objects as mere illusions, apparitions, mere appearance. There's nothing to these objects at all. Here we can reflect on the meaning of emptiness as applied to everything, and all the examples of the illusory nature of things that come up, like they're empty, like the core of a plantain or a banana plant, or they're like froth, they're like bubbles, they're like mirage appearing in a desert and so forth. They appear as if they're there, but in reality, they're unfindable. They don't exist from their own side. They're not inherently existent. They're not intrinsically existent. They don't exist by their own characteristics and so forth. So we should see them as illusory. So in other words, when our mind is swept up by emotional attraction and emotional repulsion, view the objects of those two emotions as being like an illusion. So when we hear unpleasant sounds or words, view them as mere echoes. When injuries afflict your body, see them as the fruits of past lives. So again, more succinct advice on mind training. So don't be caught up in the way we're taking these objects to exist, that unpleasant words really exist, or unpleasant words harm us, and so forth. We need to step back from that process a little bit. View them as mere echoes, as not pertaining to anyone. We feel that those insults directed to us really harm I. But I, as we conceive it, doesn't really exist. So we can view these as not being personal comments made against us. We can see them as mere sound, mere echoes, not stemming. There's no one producing them and no one receiving them. When injuries afflict our body, see them as the fruits of past lives. So this is all the karmic seeds in our mind stream that are awakened. So this is just cause and effect playing out. There's nothing we can do about cause and effect. It is always there. And then the next verse, dwell utterly in solitude beyond town limits, like the caress of a wild animal. Hide yourself away in the forest and live free of attachment. So Atisha returns now to this image of the forest, but he's saying to us, we don't actually have to go to a forest. We just need to separate ourselves from all the noise and busyness that exists wherever we are. Just sit peacefully and allow the mind to settle as if you were in a forest. Always remain firm in your commitment. When a hint of procrastination and laziness arises, at that instant, enumerate your flaws and recall the essence of spiritual conduct. So we remain firm in our commitment in mind training, or to mind training. And when a little bit of laziness or procrastination emerges, at that point, think about all our faults. So extremely skillful advice. At that time, enumerate our faults. Now, we might have aversion to doing that. Oh, I know them all too well, but actually we don't know them. That is why a laziness arises, because we're in denial of our faults. That we can relax now because we've achieved You know, we deserve to relax and just take it easy. In one sense, that's true. We can't push ourselves too hard, but often it's not a case of pushing ourselves too hard. We just get lazy naturally. So at that instant, we should enumerate flaws when laziness arises, our faults, and recall the essence of spiritual conduct. Because in essence, once we attain this path of seeing, we can begin to relax because we have direct perception of emptiness from that point on. The direct perception of emptiness is the medicine. It is the only medicine that will cure us of the vast range of afflictions that we experience. Once we gain the taste of that, once we experience it directly, then we can't lose it. From that point on, we're an Arya being. We remain an Arya being, no matter how lazy we get. We can actually, laziness, we can practice a little bit once we get there. But prior to that, we need to remember why we have a spiritual practice and what spiritual conduct is. Then the next verse. However, if you do encounter others, speak peacefully and truthfully. Do not grimace or frown, but always maintain a smile. So as we get older, we notice our, the facial expressions sort of succumbing more and more to a frown. I think it's just the face sags, and the corners of our mouth start to turn down. And if we're not careful, we can just wear this frown all the time. We look in the mirror and we're shocked by how we look. We're frowning back at ourselves. So Atisha here, and I think he would have been in his 60s when he wrote this. So he's getting on in years. Do not grimace or frown, but always maintain a smile. So we should practice to smile at others for the sake of our practice. In general, when you see others, be free of miserliness and delight in giving. Another one there. Be free of miserliness and delight in giving. So often we're in two minds about whether we should be generous or not. Can I afford it? Or we often tarry at the vital point, and so someone else comes in and pays, even though we protest loudly that, oh, I'm about to pay, I'm about to pay. So we delight in giving. There's a huge instruction here. We always should delight in giving, not think about what money will I have left if I give. Of course, this is stated elsewhere to be like the thinking of hungry ghosts. Relinquish all thoughts of envy. Also, envy, jealousy is such a pervasive, disruptive mental factor. And it's really looking at others and it's associated with anger and not being able to tolerate the good qualities of others. It only arises in the retinue of anger, envy. It's one of the 5 that arise with anger. It's poison upon poison. And in fact, it's taken out, it's listed as a poison beyond the 3 poisons. Pride, there are the 3 poisons, which are attachment, anger, and ignorance. And beyond that, we have pride as the 4th poison, and then envy or jealousy. So it's so negative that it's even listed with the big ones, with the big 3, along with pride. Relinquish all thoughts of envy. Utterly important that we do that. And we are awake to envy when it arises, so that we don't entertain it. We don't give it any scope to develop. So in verse 20, to help soothe others' minds, forsake all disputation and be endowed with forbearance. Forsake all disputation. So this is not really referring to the debate that you find in the debate grounds, say, of Sarah Draypung-Gandin, and so forth, various other monasteries where debate is practiced. Because that debate even though it's a type of dispute, it's done with the purpose of Dharma in order to understand the meaning of Dharma. And one of the best ways of understanding the meaning of Dharma is to discuss Dharma topics in the framework of expressing syllogisms and consequences that can be analyzed logically, so that one gains insight into something that's hard to understand. The only way we can understand it is through conception, and through correct conception, and that correct conception has quite an extensive definition. So the debate that you find in the debate grounds is seeking to generate correct conception, not for the sake of disputation. But we should forsake all disputation that's not for the purpose of Dharma, or discussion that's not for the purpose of Dharma, and be endowed with forbearance. We should tolerate faults that other people might claim we have, and so on. We don't dispute with that. If they say we have that fault, we have it. We are patient and we allow them to put that out there. We don't need to defend ourselves, in other words. Be free of flattery and fickleness in friendship. Be steadfast and reliable at all times. Do not disparage others, but always abide with respectful demeanor. Okay, so that helps the minds of others. It helps, therefore, our mind. Then the next verse, when giving advice, maintain compassion and altruism. Never defame the teachings, whatever practices you admire with aspiration and the 10 spiritual deeds. Strive diligently, dividing day and night. So the practices we like or that we admire or like are important for us, because it doesn't take much energy to do them, because we like doing them. And our mind is drawn to them simply because we like them. So understanding what practices we like is useful for us. And then we practice those things that we admire diligently, dividing day and night. Whatever virtues we gather through the 3 times, we dedicate them toward the unexcelled great awakening. We disperse our merit to all sentient beings and utter the peerless aspiration prayers of the 7 limbs at all times. Next verse. If you proceed thus, you'll swiftly perfect merit and wisdom and eliminate the 2 defilements. Since your human existence will be meaningful, you'll attain the unexcelled enlightenment. The wealth of faith, the wealth of morality, the wealth of giving, the wealth of learning, the wealth of conscience, the wealth of shame, the wealth of insight, these are the 7 riches. These precious and excellent jewels are the 7 inexhaustible riches. Do not speak of these to those who are not human. Among others, guard your speech. When alone, guard your mind. So that's the verses on the Bodhisattva's jewel garland. So we can see that the essence of mind training is really coming from Atisha in such verses. And we also note that there are many instructions that are given that are interrelated. And they form almost like a net of practice, one assisting the other to prevent the negative mind from manifesting and supporting our virtuous practice that stops or suppresses black karmic seeds being awakened. This, of course, is very much a part of our practice. We must strive as much as we can to not increase the heritage of black deeds or negative karmic deeds, because in the end we will have to purify it all. So it'd be like taking 1 step forward and 1.5 steps backwards if we allow ourselves simply to practice non-virtue. when, of course, there is no need to do that. Of course, practicing virtue also relies on recognizing non-virtue. So one of the greatest difficulties we have is to recognize what non-virtue is. And in order to recognize non-virtue, then we really need to understand minds and mental factors, because the minds and mental factors are the grist. They're the functioning elements of virtue and non-virtue. These are all mental states. What is virtuous and non-virtuous are mental states. So we have the 11 virtuous mental states, and those we must have a basic idea about. And of the core, the root non-virtues, that is ignorance, attachment, and anger. Just focusing on those in a way is sufficient, because if we can stop the root, then the branch afflictions that emerge from the root have no chance of arising. But we have 6 roots down to a core of 3, and then we have the 20 branch afflictions. So these are the negative states that exist. So where negativity exists, those 6 and those 20 will exist, or some of them, or a majority of them. And where virtue exists, that is where the 11 positive mental factors exist, where they're manifest. So, of course, mind training really comes down to this practice of examining one's mind 3 times during the day, 3 times during the night, for instance, as Atisha mentions, to examine the flow of our thoughts. What are we examining there? We're examining what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous. So this is not easy because we don't have single point of concentration. If we have single point of concentration, that allows us to pick up these subtle movements within the mind itself. And that, for instance, subtle level of annoyance has arisen. The image of someone arises, then a subtle level of annoyance arises in relation to that image of the person. Firstly, it might be just a feeling in relation to the person, another person, like a negative feeling, a negative mental feeling arises, focused on a particular being, a person, their face. And that negative feeling then conditions the arisal of dislike, not liking that person, and that to a certain degree of subtle aversion. And that subtle aversion may then condition annoyance. And the annoyance can then, for instance, condition wrath or rage, and so on. So this process is often extremely rapid and extremely subtle. If one has single point of concentration, then it's possible to begin to see this process and evaluate it. And through evaluating it, then it's possible to gather the strength and determination to stop it. But until we see the fault of it, then we will be inheritors of that process. We will inherit every outcome of that process. So our mind training is very much summarized in the second verse of those the Bodhisattva's jewel garland, where it says, again and again, 3 times, day and night, examine the flow of your thoughts. Right, so what we're doing is taking that as the preliminary basis for looking at the actual text that we're going to look at, which is Chekawa's commentary on the 8 verses of mind training. So we just move ahead to that text. So I think everyone has a copy of it. So what I was thinking to do is we'll start just by, we'll read through the 8 verses. Just since now we have fresh in our mind Atisha's own verses, the jewel garland of the Bodhisattva. With that fresh in mind, we jump ahead probably 50 years in Tibet to Langri Tampa. Now, Langri Tampa was a student of Geshe Potawa, and Geshe Potawa was a student of Drom Trungpa. And Drom Trungpa, of course, was one of the main students of Atisha. So Geshe Langri Tampa was also a contemporary of Geshe Chekawa, and Geshe Chekawa was the teacher of Geshe Chekawa. So these occur, really in the 12th century. Geshe Chekawa, for instance, was born in 1101. His teacher Chekawa was born in 1069. Langri Tampa was born in 1054. So these are after Atisha, because Atisha's dates, let me just have a quick look. Atisha's dates are 982 to 1054. So Geshe Langri Tampa was born in the year that Atisha passed away. So we can sense that, he entered the monastic tradition and started his training perhaps about 70 years after the passing away of Atisha, but at a time when the practices have been set forth by Drom Trungpa, who was his main translator and main student, and others such as Kutun Suntur Yungdrung and Wok Lotsawa Sherab, Lepa Sherab. So there are different students of Atisha who gave different teachings themselves to their own disciples, and these traditions have expanded and continued on, some to the present day. So Drom Trungpa actually was the teacher of the 3 brothers. So they included Geshe Potawa, Chengawa, and Geshe Puchungwa. And it's in the tradition of Potawa, Geshe Potawa, who was mainly the scriptural tradition coming from Atisha through Potawa, Geshe Potawa, that we're looking at here. So I'm thinking it might be, actually, we might do that later. What I was thinking to do is just to read these verses for a start. So there's only 8 verses. Geshe Langri Tampa didn't live long, 1054 to 1093, 39. Died at the age of 39. Anyway, with the wish to achieve the highest aim, verse 1, with the wish to achieve the highest aim which surpasses even a wish-fulfilling gem, I will train myself to at all times cherish every sentient being as supreme. Whenever I interact with others, I will view myself as inferior to all, and I will train myself to hold others superior from the depths of my heart. During all my activities, I will probe my mind. As soon as an affliction arises, since it endangers myself and others, I will train myself to confront it directly and avert it. When I encounter beings of unpleasant character, and those oppressed by intense negative karma and suffering. As though finding a treasure of precious jewels, I will train myself to cherish them, for they are so rarely found. When others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse and slander, I will train to take the defeat upon myself and offer the victory to others. Even if one whom I have helped, or in whom I have placed great hope, gravely mistreats me in hurtful ways, I will train myself to view him as my sublime teacher. In brief, I will train myself to offer benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly, and respectfully take upon myself all the hurts and pains of my mothers. By ensuring that all this remains undefiled from the stains of the 8 mundane concerns, and by understanding all things as illusions, I will train myself to be free of the bondage of clinging. So, again, these are verses that have distilled a great cross-section of training, mind training advice. And each of these verses probably requires about 10 years of practice, minimum. And of course, one of the things for us is we live in a very busy world, and this attachment to instant gratification, instant progress. But that attachment to instant progress or gratification is completely unreasonable, because the mind doesn't respond to immediate training. Unless oneself, of course, has achieved in past lifetimes most of the training required, then quick results can occur in this current life. Whereas, some masters, they merely need to read a text and they've memorized it, or they merely need to sit for, a few weeks, and they attain calm abiding, and then they gain insight, and they attain enlightenment, small, medium, or great levels of enlightenment. Such beings, like the early disciples, like the 5 early disciples who spent 6 years with the Buddha, with Shakyamuni, prior to him revealing or demonstrating the attainment of enlightenment. Those 5 disciples, such as Mahanama and so on, and Arya Kondanya, they didn't require much teaching. For when the Buddha visited them in Sarnath, in the deer grove, in the Rishi grove, the 5 had left the Buddha because he'd started to eat again. And they walked all the way to Varanasi, and then to Sarnath, to the Rishi grove. And when they saw the Buddha Shakyamuni coming through the trees and into the field where they were seated, initially they looked and said, "Oh, here comes the backslider. Here comes Shakyamuni, he's reverted to indulgence." Well, we haven't reverted to indulgence. We will just ignore him. We won't even pay any respect to him. But as he drew closer, they began to notice this change in him. He wasn't quite as he was before. And even beside their pact not to show any respect, they found themselves getting up and offering him a seat. And he sat down with them and started to teach them. And initially they had great doubt about whether he had anything to teach, but as they listened, they began to understand that he had changed. And therefore he turned the first wheel, turning of the wheel of Dharma, and taught the 4 Noble Truths. And through them hearing the Four Noble Truths, they all attain the state of an Arya, state of a noble being, and understood emptiness directly. Just hearing the Four Noble Truths, we cited from 3 different perspectives each, so 12 different perspectives. So one can look at such practitioners and see that they have a vast a collection of merit and wisdom from the past that supports their quick understanding. There's not much dust in their eyes. Initially, when the Buddha attained enlightenment in Sarnath, he remained for 7 weeks without leaving the vicinity of the tree. And finally, he was offered, like a bowl and so forth. He was offered food. And then, as he began to contemplate interacting with others, these beings were starting to ask him to teach them. He thought, who can I teach? Who has little dust in their eyes? And then he thought of his 2 former teachers like Udraka and so forth, who he'd studied under for some time, especially in the attainment of the absorptions or the jhanic states. And he realized that both of them had passed away. And then who else? My 5 former companions. Yes, I should go to teach them because they don't have much dust in their eyes. So for us, we have to assume that we've got quite a lot of dust in our eyes, that we are borderline cases. We have some merit because we've encountered the teachings, but our practice is not very strong because we still have many faults that we haven't dealt with yet. And we're still bickering with others, and we still have all these thoughts of jealousy and pride and arrogance and so on, arising within our mind stream. The mind stream is not tamed. We haven't attained single point of concentration, but we do have some positive imprints. So when we look at these verses of mind training, we agree, oh yes, yes, I should practice that. That sounds good. That sounds beneficial. I would benefit. But our practice tends to be on quite a superficial level. And on a superficial level, we affirm the meaning. But then when we look a little bit deeper, we realize, oh, I've got a lot of work to do on myself yet. So the purpose of examining these types of verses, again, is to bring these into our practice, into our actual practice, understanding that this is going to take years and years, because our imprints are not, like those of the 5 early companions of the Buddha. But we need to make them that strong. And so by following these types of instruction, the instruction coming from Atisha, and from Atisha gained them from Ser Lingpa, and Ser Lingpa gained them from prior masters in India, going back to the time of the Buddha. So they're authentic teachings, and they're speaking directly to where we are in the current moment. And their teachings are saying to us, we should listen, we should investigate, we should take these on board. Perhaps I should recite them every day so that they're fresh in mind, at least once a day. There's only 8 verses. And I shouldn't be distracted. So we've reached this point. We've just briefly done the 8 verses, just read through them. That's probably sufficient for today. And next week we will go on with Geshe Chekawa's commentary on these 8 verses. I'm not sure if we have, do we have question and answer sessions? Anyone have any, do we have a facility for that, or?
Well, if anybody wants to answer a question, since it's not that
Yes.
many people there, they can just unmute themselves and ask the question.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Look, as you were going through these things, one of the things that occurred to me, and you had alluded to it earlier, was that we are in a different time, different culture. And I've got a couple of comments about, okay, that you should draw, for instance, you should draw attention to your own faults. That can be, right? Am I on the page there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. To me, that can be a distraction. And in a way, if it's not done really carefully, it's drawing attention to yourself. Yeah, you know what I mean? There's that sense of, look at me, I'm more inferior than anybody. So, it's something that needs to be handled tactfully. I've seen it handled very. Yeah?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And in fact, it's one of the 7 types of pride, the pride of inferiority, like being,
Yeah.
touting that as, as a quality that.
So I'm saying that, to sort of like analyze one's faults, you have to think about it carefully and how you're doing it. Yeah, that's the thing that came up for me. We talked about that.
Absolutely. We do, and I think at times we can reveal our faults to others. At other times we can't. Otherwise, it looks like we're just grandstanding, or we're just highlighting our.
Yeah. Okay.
It's out of pride that we're speaking, for sure. But it's only when appropriate, like when we're amongst a group of like-minded. But the stronger we are with our practice, probably the less restrictions there are. There are stories of, practitioners in Tibet who were practicing mind training. One comes to mind, I've forgotten which one it was, that he was seated in the rows of monks, and the food was being, like served into bowls. And he could see that he was really attracted to the food that was coming. I think it might have been yogurt or something. And when he saw himself so attached to the coming meal, the coming food, he yelled out, "Thief, thief," at the top of his voice. And meaning, that the attachment, to the food, was made him into something like a thief. And he's supposed to be a renounced monk, and you don't have attachment to food. You should, take it in a proper way. Otherwise, you are a little bit like a thief as an ordained person, surviving on as a mendicant. But he yelled it out in front of the entire group there as a teaching to himself, that I'm not dealing with this attachment. But he was in a position to practice on that level. For us, it's probably not a good idea, to broadcast all our faults. It could be taken in the wrong way, as you point out. So when there's no benefit for others, then probably not much use saying such a thing. But we should not try and conceal. We should be devoid of this thought to conceal.
The other thing I have a issue with this mind training and how it's laid out, it sort of tells you prescriptively, it seems like it's a lot of, well, don't do thus and so, without giving you any recommendations about what you should do, right? For instance, okay, overlook others' faults. Well, how do you do it? I mean, for me, if I'm going to do that, what I try to tell myself is, okay, this person is behaving in a certain manner that I find upsetting, and probably most people would. And the question I have to ask myself, rather than, okay, this is just, a bad person, rather like, okay, have empathy. It's like, what went into their life that they turned out to be like this, right?
Mm.
And so if I do that, that has a, so to speak, therapeutic healing facility for me. Now, with the mind training, I don't find those kinds of suggestions available. So that's where I'm finding this is, I need to fill in a lot of stuff. If you get my...
Right. No, that's fine. And in fact, I think that's common to everyone. We see advice given. We're not too sure just by given the verse that we're reading what the solution is. But often within the mind training texts, the solution is there, but it may be, in another text, or it might be later on in the same text where it becomes clear. And the authors had a particular reason for putting it in that order. But yes, seeing the faults of others is something that, is just so pervasive for us, and reacting to it and allowing dislike, negative feelings towards that person arise because of that. To actually stop that process is important, because, of course, we take it upon ourselves, the whole, idea of bodhicitta, of enlightening all sentient beings based on equanimity. So having that basic equanimity in place really does mean one is not close nor distant from anyone. So one is overlooking their faults, aware of them. We need to be aware of them, but we don't take it personally ourselves, but we're just observing without any resentment arising. So there's probably quite a lot of other, like advice given on that particular point, in, for instance, the mind training text in general. And often we need a lot of strategies, because the first 5 strategies we use to overcome an attitude that we have might not work. And we really have to be sensitive as to what does work, and then be mindful of that, mindful of what works. Don't forget it. Once we see something that's useful, we take note of it. If we have to write notes to ourselves, and so on, because this is being done for centuries, people writing out lists of things. A lot of these mind training texts are actually, when I look at them, they're like a list of notes about how oneself should practice. They've written it down, and then later their students have published it. So I think a very good question. We need a lot of strategies for each fault. And in fact, that's probably why the 84,000 instructions were given, in order for all the different faults that can arise, because we need lots of options, lots of different strategies.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we could just do the prayers now and finish the session today.
Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that's not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparable, kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Swift return for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas per Eka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the officers of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed for peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth are the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta, of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for the fortunate disciples. Long life prayer for Ozalhita. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West. Mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please, live long. Geshe Chekawa, long life prayer. Beloved teacher, leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explain through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are then an equal guide. Please live a long and stable life.
Great. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Hope you have a great week. Full of good practice.